So hello, everyone. My name is Martin Bavink. I am chairing this seminar on small, low-cost fish from bait to plate. And we have now reached the first substantial session looking particularly at the ecology and the harvesting section of small fish chains. And this session will be moderated by Professor Jeppe Kolding of the University of Bergen. There are a few, the program has changed a little in comparison with the original plan. Jeppe will tell us more about this. And this particular session will be lasting for 2 hours until 1:30 Central European time. So that's after which we will have a lunch break, of course. So, Jeppe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin, and welcome to all of you to this very interesting seminar. My name is Jeppe Kolding. I'm a professor in fisheries biology at the University in Bergen, but I've spent most of my career in research in Africa. So I'm working almost entirely with developing countries and mainly in inland fisheries. So my presentation at the end here will be mainly on inland fisheries. But we have two more speakers in this session here. The first one out is Santiago de la Puente. He is in Lima in Peru, and he will tell us about one of the most important fisheries in the world, the Anchovy fishery in the Peruvian upwelling. And the next speaker will be Professor Francis Nunoo from the University of Ghana, who is also a member in our small fish food project. By the way, I forgot to mention that I'm also the leader of the coordinator of the small fish food project. And Francis, he will tell us about the small pelagic fisheries in West Africa. And then I will, in the third presentation, I will talk about inland fisheries in Africa, or inland fisheries in general, but mainly in Africa. And by the end, we have the honor to invite Martin Pastoors, who is the scientific officer of the Pelagic Fisheries Association in the Netherlands. And he will give some comments and be a discussant in this session here. So welcome everybody, and I think we should just jump into it and give the floor, or rather the screen, to Santiago. So Santiago, if you're ready, then please go ahead. Thanks a lot.
Hi, good morning from the west coast of South America. I'm going to proceed to share my screen. Hello, so today I'm going to be talking a bit about the use and management of anchovy stocks in Peru. Peruvian fisheries are the second largest in the world in terms of yield, and we represent currently 8% of the global catch. Anchoveta, which is a small pelagic forage fish, represents 80% of our catch, and most of it is used for fish meal and fish oil production. Just to get an idea of how big our population is, we have 33 million people, and 12% of children are currently malnourished. Feeding our population is still a challenge. When we look about this fishery, over time, Anchoveta, all of our management has focused on the Peruvian Anchoveta, and the Peruvian Marine Research Institute, together with the Ministry of Production, they are IMARPE and Produce in the figure, have worked really hard together with the fishers to produce well-managed sustainable fish. We have significant surveys of the ecosystem and of the stocks. We have catch limits. It's a sustainable fishery. When we look about what has happened over the last 30 years in terms of management, this system has co-developed between these three kind of branches: the executive, the scientific institutes, and the fishing industry. And so it's serving to parties in favor of sustainability. In 2006, Peru started to implement harvest control rules that were more precautionary to uncertainty, and this led to a reduction in the average annual catch, a change that produced a shortage or a reduced supply of fish meal for the global markets. We are now producing only 20%, 25% of the global fish meal supply, but this used to be as high as 40% in the past. And this decline triggered massive growth in fish meal processing capacity in other places of the world, such as some North African countries like Morocco, Mauritania, and Senegal, or in India and China. Later, in 2009, Peru implemented a catch share program that improved the compliance of seasonal catch limits and reduced the excess capacity, as well as increased the profitability of the largest companies. To get an idea of this, the top seven largest companies, on average, export $1 billion of feed. But this also created an issue, which is the catch share system led to a massive concentration of power and capital. The largest companies now catch 60% of the total level catch and are fully vertically integrated, and they have outcompeted the many smaller processing plants, and now thus control 90% of the whole quota, or like 90% of the quota goes through them. This makes them incredibly strong in terms of decision making and influencing the governance of the sector. But let's take a step back and let's dive a bit more into the anchovy value chains. When we look at anchoveta, we've talked a bit about fishmeal, which is the main, I guess, flow that our value chain takes. The anchoveta is caught by large industrial fishmeal or industrial processing vessels, taken to the coast where it's processed for fishmeal, which is then shipped to places like, for example, China, where it's concentrated into an omega-3 rich oil, which is then shipped to somewhere in Norway, for example, where it's consumed as a nutritional supplement. Alternatively, it can go to, let's say, Denmark, where it's turned into feed that then goes to feed the Norwegian salmon industry that ends up producing salmon for restaurants, right? This whole value chain is interesting because only a small component of it happens in Peru, and most of the added value of the fish meal and fish oil industry is appropriated in developed countries of the global north. However, when we look at the rest of the catch, this is caught mainly by small scale and artisanal personage. They supply large value chains that generate a significant contribution to national employment and revenue, although an important part of production is also exported. These industries have grown a lot since the early 2000s, but they have not managed to process more than 125,000 tons of fish per year, of anchoveta per year. This is roughly 2% of what we're catching. So 98% goes to fish meal, 2% goes to direct human consumption. And we've been following the Peruvian fisheries value chains for quite some time. And this has allowed us to get an idea of the sector as a whole. We use this information to populate integrated ecological economic models that then allow us to test alternative strategies and give us alternative harvest strategies, as well as giving us an idea of how individual fisheries or the fisheries sector as a whole is impacting specific targeted resources or marine ecosystems. When we worked with this for the first time, we found a few very interesting things in Peru. For example, in 2009, the Peruvian fisheries sector, including marine aquaculture production, fisheries, and guano harvesting, employed a total of 232,000 people. Yet only 34% of them were employed at sea. I mean, fishermen or shellfish farmers. The rest were employed across the seafood value chains on land. And the fishmeal industry, although being responsible for over 80% of the catch, I think that in this year it was something around 85% of the catch, it only produced 13% of the jobs across all of the fishing sector. When we compare this with the revenue, the fishery sector revenue was somewhere around 7.8, 7.9 billion US dollars. Only a minor fraction of this revenue came from operations that were conducted at sea, that's roughly 22%. Yet the reduction industry, the largest in terms of process production, only amounted to 31% of the revenue of the sector. The circles in the figure represent how much value each of the different components of the value chain produced. And if you can see, restaurants, local markets, freezing plants, fresh seafood, and middlemen for freezing are large components of where the money comes from. This, when we compare it to the fishing plants and the silk retainers, what we're seeing is that actually feeding people creates more jobs and money than using anchovy for fish meal. When we take a closer look at economic multipliers with that current production matrix, for each dollar made at sea in the fish meal industry, $2.92 were made across the fishery sector as a whole. The industry for the human consumption had a smaller multiplier, which was 1.83. And it makes sense that companies or Peruvian companies are seeking to make fish meal. 2.92 is larger than 1.83. However, from a social point of view, there are many more jobs and there's a higher overall employment multiplier for the human consumption industries we use in Anchoveta. So it makes sense that the government might seek to also promote the growth of the human consumption industry. And it's important to note that although most of our catch is being used for fish meal, Peruvians have a very long tradition of eating anchovies. Anchoveta was a significant part of the diet of coastal Peruvians going back thousands of years. Yet with the industrialization of the reduction industry in the mid-1950s, anchovies started to be associated with unpleasant smells and a belief that was persistent that they were not good to eat, and that's why we were feeding them to animals. As a result, their use in the Peruvian culinary tradition was lost. My dad used to eat them for breakfast. I never tried one until much, much later in my life. Nonetheless, anchovies are tasty, nutritious, high quality food. In 2006, we started working with chefs and graphic designers to promote the rebirth of our culinary tradition and of the anchoveta-based seafood industry. We ended up running 4 anchovy weeks. This poster corresponds to the last of them that took place in 2012, where we reintroduced anchovies as delicious, nutritious fish that were worth our attention and our consumption. Recipes were distributed with national newspapers. Chefs appear in the news. We made the president eat anchovies. It was a big campaign, and we really helped create a market. However, there's a lot of factors that have prevented the growth of this market in Peru, and I'm going to address a bit of them later on in the presentation. However, we know now that anchoveta are fantastic food items. So given that we know how the system works and the value chain, we can play a what if game. What if anchoveta were used exclusively for canning in Peru? That's a question that we asked in a paper that was published a few years ago. And I realize that there's lots of numbers here, but let's take a look at some of them in greater detail. What I'm showing now is a baseline of how we use the anchoveta that was caught in 2013. This production matrix created 22,000 jobs and over $1.6 billion in revenue. Anchoveta was used for reduction, and a minor component was used for canning, curing, and freezing industries, or sold in the fresh food market. However, if all anchoveta caught in Peru in 2013 was used for canning instead, this species would have generated 2.8 times more jobs than our baseline. And it would also increase the total revenue by 20%. But it's important to note that although we're testing or using all the fish in the canning industry, a large component of the revenue comes from receivable fish meal. This is fish meal made out of byproducts of processing fish for direct human consumption. And this is why our fish meal production, although not destined to fish meal, only half. But we created something fantastic, which is 36 times more seafood than what we actually did that year. So when we see this, there's a question: how would using all of this anchoveta for human consumption impact Peruvian nutrition? We've been working to answer this through multiple indicators, and I'm going to try to keep this super high level. We have our nutrient supply, which will be the catch times an edible fraction of the fish times the nutritional content of that fish in particular. We also have another indicator, which is the nutritional demand, which is estimated based on the daily requirements of a particular nutrient by age and sex group times the population times the 365 days to get an idea of how much nutrients we are requiring that year. And then we estimate the demand satisfaction, which is the relationship between how much nutrients we're supplying and our demand. If the demand satisfaction is over 1%, that means we have a surplus of nutrients based on our production. If it's below, it means that we need more than we are actually producing. So using the census data collected in Peru, as well as different population models produced by either the World Bank or the Peruvian Institute of Statistics, we can get an idea of how our population is projected to grow and has been growing. And these are quite similar in terms of total numbers, but it's important to note that they differ in terms of their assumptions about the age structure of the population and how many men and women are in our population. This is important to note because daily nutritional requirements change with age and differ among sex groups. So by merging these data sets, what we create is estimates of the Peruvian demand of nutrients for 16 nutrient types. The coastal models assume that only coastal Peruvians eat seafood and that migration rates from the Andes and Amazonian provinces to the coast will continue at current levels. The other models assume that we could feed seafood to all of Peru's population. And so what would be the demand if we would have to feed them with seafood as well? So one thing that we can see over time is that this demand is increasing. So Peru is going to grow somewhat around 7 million people by 2050. And this growth will increase the demand for nutrients across the spectrum by around 30% in comparison to current levels. So for example, we will need an additional roughly 200,000 tons of protein in 2050 in respect to what we have as a baseline in 2018. When we translate this, or like when we just focus on the coast, if we assume that only coastal Peruvians can satisfy their nutritional demand using seafood, then the increasing nutrient demand is going to be higher in relative terms because the coastal population is increasing faster due to migration. Yet, as the coastal population is only a fraction of the total population, the increasing demand is smaller in absolute terms. So nationally, we will need 200,000 tons of protein, but if we only focus on the coast, the demand will be somewhere around 175,000 tons. This is annual, by the way. With this in mind, we need to ask ourselves, and who is supplying these nutrients today? So that was the other bit of, or the other indicator. And for that, what we did was grab the catch, the total catch, and multiply it by its nutritional content. And what we see is that we have been producing. Well, I must take a step back. Like I've been looking at these figures for quite a bit, and I don't know if it's fully translates, but I think it's kind of safe to say that the total nutrient supply follows the trend set by the anchoveta landings over time. There is a tiny line in the bottom of every graph, and this line represents the supply of nutrients that are destined for direct human consumption. So as you can see, only a minor fraction of what we are producing remains as soon as we just extract the catch that is destined for fish meal and fish oil. So this is all the fisheries combined, not just the ones for anchoveta. And when we look at this in a closer detail, based on the 2009-2010 period, regardless of the nutrient, less than 20% of their supply remained after accounting for what was lost to consumers due to reduction in industries. It is important to note that in this period of time, only anchovy was used for reduction. Moreover, Peru is a net seafood exporter, and these numbers are not considering what will be later lost to consumers through seafood exports, for example, of canned tuna, frozen mahi, or whatnot. So this is important because when we look at the Peruvian regulations, fisheries regulations, feeding Peruvians is among the main objectives of the norms. So who is supplying these remaining nutrients? When we take an even closer look, it's currently mostly cephalopods and pelagic fish. Cephalopods, mainly the Humboldt squid, which is the second largest fishery in Peru. Again, most of it is exported. But small pelagics are important sources of proteins, of polyunsaturated fatty acids, vitamin A, vitamin B1, vitamin 2, calcium, and iron. So now I want to play another what if game with you. What if anchoveta was destined exclusively for direct human consumption? Let's only think about anchoveta's contribution here. How would this resource help Peru cope with, let's say, its increasing demand of proteins over time? To answer that question, I used a continuous delay difference model to predict future catches using current harvest control rules under two climate change scenarios. One where we have similar similar environmental conditions as the ones that we are currently experiencing, and another one where we have a decline in the potential, in the catch potential, as predicted by Chung and collaborators under an RCP 8.5 scenario. Regardless of the anchovy population decline or of the human population increase, it is interesting to know that we can still satisfy a massive amount of the Peruvian protein demand based on a single species in 2050. This is just one fishery. And regardless of the changes, we are somewhere around with 20% of our future demand of proteins could be satisfied without needing to increase our resilience in food imports or without needing to change our current landscape, cutting forests or diverting waters from rivers to favor agriculture. So this is very nice, but what is preventing this from happening? What are the barriers that we are facing currently for this transition? One thing that we see is that the international demand for fish meal has increased significantly, and this has driven fish meal prices and fish oil prices up, increasing the trade-off between exporting fish meal or feeding Peruvians. So currently, the largest 7 fish meal producing companies are making $1 billion every year at the expense of feeding half of our population. This is causing an increase in the required per capita investment to satisfy our protein demands if we exclusively use anchovy. But it's important to note that this increase in investment we're still talking about cheap protein here. So to satisfy our nutritional or protein requirements in a year, we would need to invest somewhere around, or like the average Peruvian would have to invest somewhere around $67. If we compare this to chicken, the average Peruvian would have to invest $132. So it's roughly half of what it would cost to feed Peruvians with chicken. Chicken is the main source of animal protein consumed in the coast, for example. But this is just one bit. International prices, or like the growing international prices for fish meal and fish oil, are also promoting the use of anchoveta caught for direct human consumption industries in illegal fish meal production. This is a study that was published by Oceana a couple of years ago that shows that based on their groundwork, they were able to estimate that 90,000 tons of illegal fish meal were produced in 10 different in a series of different illegal fish meal producing sites between 2014 and 2016. So Oceana estimated that roughly 150,000 tons of anchovy were illegally caught and used for fish meal production by small-scale fishers and by illegal fish meal producers. Let's remember that this is more than we have ever managed to insert in the direct human consumption industry's value chains. So what factors are contributing to this illegal fish meal production? We have to think about the higher cost of operation when fishing for direct human consumption. Fishers are required to insulate the hold of their vessels and use larger amount of ice. Ice is scarce in the coastal Peru, which is a desert, and so this means higher costs. Also, we have lower catches per trips to preserve the quality of the fish. So many companies ask their small-scale fishers to cut part of what they would normally land so that they can, to catch a little bit less of what they would normally catch so that when they land the fish is not squashed. So this is, this reduces the catch per trip and it's perceived by fishers as foregone profits. And that is mainly because there is an inadequate pricing of the anchoveta. The price premiums offered for really good fish in nice qualities, nice quality fish are very minor. And overall, the current supply of anchoveta and actually the whole fleet that supplies this direct human consumption industries is excessive. So what we are doing is we are driving the prices for anchoveta for direct human consumption down, whilst we are also seeing a massive increase in the prices for anchoveta used in fish meal production. It's also important to note that fisheries enforcement of regulations is much weaker in the small scale sector. But that's not just it. Other factors are limiting this, including the fact that consumers are not used to eating anchoveta anymore, or that they prefer other cheap seafood species, or that people that need the anchoveta the most, like in the highlands or the Amazon regions, can access it because simply there's like inexistent markets and supply chains that go from the coast to the Amazon. Also we see that when they are there, the presentations are inadequate for the realities of the people needing them. For example, most of the anchovy that is eaten in or that is sent to the Andes, for example, is salted anchoveta, and fresh water in the highlands is a scarce resource. And before they start preparing them, they require a large investment in water to wash the anchovy and extract a bit of those salts. So that in terms of presentation is definitely affecting the use. And well, I think that we're going to cover a lot of these topics in the upcoming sessions. So let's wrap things up. Anchoveta is a sustainably managed fishery whose catch potential is predicted to decline due to climate change. Currently, most of the catch is used for reduction. And transitioning towards seafood production could severely reduce Peru's unfilled nutritional demand, currently as well as in the future. And this would generate more jobs and national revenue. However, it's going to be very tough to affect the value chains that are currently in place, because those that are making fish meal are making a lot of money. And the weak rule of law in the small-scale fisheries and the growing international demand for fish meal and fish oil is making illegal operations very profitable. And this production limits the growth of anchovy-based seafood industries. Other barriers, although not fully discussed here, include some outdated regulations, consumer preferences, transitional costs to create market access, inadequate presentations, among many others. I would like to thank all of my collaborators. I work with a bunch of fantastic researchers from many different institutes and in many different countries that are helping us develop this kind of work that we're doing here. We are also linking multiple value chains and working with value chains in Norway as well as in Canada. So if you have any questions, I'll gladly answer them.
Thank you very much, Santiago. I think we will have to wait with the questions to after the presentations and then sum them up there. But I think you made a very good start here on particularly on the dilemma between aquaculture and fish meal production or animal feed production and human consumption. So thanks a lot for that introduction you gave to that, and we will follow it up later. I think then we will have to move on to Francis Nunoo, if he's on. Are you there, Francis? I don't see you in the list.
Jeppe?
You're there, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Let's see.
So while Francis is, I don't know why my camera is not on. Okay, here, it was the host that has forgotten me. It doesn't really matter, you have seen me. But while Francis is preparing and getting on, then let me just introduce you. Francis is the professor at the University of Ghana. He's also a member of our small fish food team. And he has made, he's been working for many years on the west coast of Africa on the pelagic fisheries there. So if you're ready with your presentation, Francis.
Can you see the screen?
Yeah,
I've
but
just shared the screen.
Yeah, but you are sharing the wrong screen. I think you are, if you have two screens, I think you are sharing the wrong screen because we are seeing your desktop and not the presentation.
Okay, can it be done from the secretariat for me right now, please?
Do you want us to run the presentation for you instead?
Yes, please. Yes, yeah.
Okay, I can run it from you from my time, from my side, just a little bit of moment here. I have it here. So can I run it from me? Let me just try to share the screen. Just a moment. I can't share my screen. No, I can here, sorry. Do you see it now?
Yes, I see it now.
Okay, then you just tell me when I have to swap, Francis.
Okay, all right. Good morning to everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on the catch and catch rate of small pelagics in 5 West African countries. My name is Francis Nunoo from the Department of Marine and Fisheries Sciences, University of Ghana. I'm a fish biologist. Next slide, please. I'll be speaking about the species that form the small pelagic species in West Africa, their distribution, exploitation, stock status, the catch and effort and CPU trends, and then some management options. Next slide, please. So in West Africa, there are about 5 to 7 species forming what we call the small pelagic species. They are the mainstay of the fisheries. They form between 60 to 90% of the catch of West African catches in these countries. So they are so very, very important. When they are in good shape or when the catch is very good, then the overall fishery is doing well. Because I said they form 60 to 90% of the catch. So these species are Sardinales, the anchovy, chopped mackerel, Atlantic bumper, moonfish, and round scarred. And we'll see some pictures of them. On your screen is what we call the chopped mackerel, Scomba colliers. Next slide, please. So we have Sardinella maderensis and Sardinella aurita. That is the flat Sardinella, which is on top, and then the round Sardinella below. Next slide. So this is the anchovy that we have, and Grollis and Cascolus on the top, and then the chopped mackerel again below. Next slide. So these are the common small pelagic fishes that are commonly caught along the coast of West Africa. So you have the round scarred, you have the moonfish, that's the Selene dorsalis, flat Sardinella, chopped mackerel, and the bumper, Chloroscombrus chrysurus. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the dominant species in West African countries, and it drives the productivity of the fisheries. Next slide. These species generally have these environmental conditions driving them. In fact, all of them, not only Sardinella, almost all the 7 species occur in very low sea surface temperature in abundance, in high salinities beyond 35, often up to 35.5, and they are found in waters between 0 to 300 meter depth. It is driven by upwelling, the cold nutrient upwelling in our waters, the Guinea current, large marine ecosystem, cold upwelling that happens normally between July to September, the major one, and then another one between December and February along the West African coast. These species are transboundary, and they are shared by these 5 countries along the coast of West Africa. Next slide. The distribution of these species followed this trend that is captured here for maderensis. We have the northern stock way up there towards Morocco, etc., Mauritania. So the northern stock. Then we have the central stock, which is around Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And then we have the southern stock. So you can clearly see that for Sardinella maderensis and that for Sardinella aurita. That is the trend for all the 7 species. Clear distribution trend, northern, central, and southern stocks. And this is the survey, the last survey done by Fridtjof Nansen in 2016. Next slide, please. These species are normally exploited by encircling gears, pair seine offshore and beach seine on land. So surrounding nets go for them, and there are so many of them always pushing and going for these species within the coast. And the drag nets are said that it is very difficult for you to escape. For a fish, it's difficult for you to escape. The mesh sizes are small. By law, they are not supposed to be anything less than 25 mm, but we have quite a number of the nets having 10 mm, 15 mm, 20 mm. So they harvest from very tiny sizes up to bigger sizes. And in fact, those that harvest anchovy have very tiny mesh size, usually 10 mm to pick anchovy, because the excuse is that anchovy is quite small, so they have 10 mm at their bags. Next slide. So this is a picture of beach seine on shore. Next slide. And this is a typical catch. You see, the catches in recent times are not too good. There are plastics in them, and the fish sizes are very small. Catches have not been good for the past decade. They've not been too good. And you can see the fishes in this picture are not that happy. After working for some time between 6 to 8 hours, this is all they have. And the value is very small. Next slide. They are driven to fish also using illegal methods. For instance, they fish with electricity and they fish with light. This is a picture of a boat that is filled with fish caught illegally using light. And using light as an attractive device, they capture them very early, earlier than they are sexually matured. Next slide, please. There is also quite a heavy post-harvest loss in its production. Quite a lot of fish get broken during smoking, and sometimes fish come to shore already spoiled. The spoiled ones are sometimes even used in dried and used in condiments as fermented fish. But there's quite a heavy loss after post-harvest. And this quantity is not yet estimated, but it ranges between 30 to 50% of post-harvest loss in the sector. Next slide. So what I present here is the findings of the CCAF working group, the FAO CCAF working group, which met recently in 2019 to assess this stock. So their report can be accessed online. So the report is available, and some other information has been taken from the FAO State of Fisheries and Aquaculture 2020 report. So the CCAF working group met and they assessed these species, Sardina pilchardus and Sardinella, all the way to Bonga. But the Sardina pilchardus is found in the northern stock, the northern part of West Africa. So I will not be considering that much, but looking at the rest, Sardinella aurita, horse mackerel, chub mackerel, and growlies, and Bonga. The main small pelagic species decrease, according to the analysis, decrease slightly between 2017 and 2018. So the decrease is not that much within the 2 years. But sardines dominated the catch, 53%, and that is the Sardinella aurita and Sardinella maderensis, followed by chub mackerel, and then the horse mackerel, and then Atlantic horse mackerel and false cod. So the quantities taken or harvested or reported by the 5 countries, and the information presented here is the report from the 5 countries. And Sardinella aurita and maderensis, together with Bonga, were assessed as overexploited. And they used the Schaefer model, and did some yield per recruit model to arrive at these findings. The horse mackerel and anchovy were assessed as fully exploited, and the sardine was considered to be not fully exploited. By this sardine, I mean the northern sardine, the one in the Morocco. But it is not my focus now because it's in the northern part of West Africa. So in addition, so far the FAO report for 2020 also says anchovy, chub mackerel, and Sardinella are overexploited. I believe they are quoting the same report by CCAF working group. Next slide. So these are the catch trends in 5 West African countries for the species of concern. And small pelagic species for Ghana, and you can follow the color code. And if you look at the patterns, they follow a similar pattern. They follow a similar pattern. When it goes down in one country, it almost goes down in all the other countries. When it goes up, they all go up. And like I said, it's almost like it's one stock that is being shared by all the countries. So you can see a similar pattern of catch for the small pelagics in 5 West African countries: Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal for 2008 to 2018. Next slide. So this is also a slide showing the fishing effort for the same countries, and the trend, as I said, appear similar. Basically, they move in between the countries, You have Ghanaians in Nigeria, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal. You have Senegalese in Ghana, vice versa. They migrate and move along, and they do things almost similarly among the countries. Next slide. This slide is showing the catch per unit effort, which shows the catch rate. It also is an indicator of the abundance of the resource. And you see a slightly decreasing trend over the years, over the past decade. And this trend has not been like this, has been like this from the past 3 to 4 decades. It's been decreasing, never really going up, decreasing in a fluctuating trend. So you see it go up, come down, go up, come down. And it's been found that over the years, for the past 3 to 4 decades, we've seen, if you compare the highest production figures over the 3-4 decades compared to now, you can see a reduction of up to about, what is left is about 20% of the highest ever catch within the past 3 decades. And that is the indication of overexploitation. That is what the committee refers to, using the models as well to announce the overexploitation. Next slide. So the small pelagic stocks, according to this assessment, is overexploited generally, and there is the need for strong national actions. All the 5 nations in West Africa has been told to go in for strong actions to reduce the degradation of the fish stock. There's the need to enforce the relevant laws, which is not being equally implemented along the countries. There's the need to enact and enforce closed season areas and seasons. Ghana started with closed season for its artisanal fishery, and we did also for the industrial fishery for the past 3 years. The other countries are learning and about to follow suit. There is the need to cancel licenses for violators of the law, people who are fishing with light and other chemicals and explosives. There's the need to facilitate co-management systems. Ghana has set up a co-management policy, which they are about to implement going forward this year. There's the need to do research plans that will determine the stock status and the mapping of spawning areas, and all these plans are there that needs to be implemented. And the various countries need to collaborate effectively. What we found is that when one country tries to clamp down on the fishing, then they migrate and move to other countries. So the bodies like FCWC and others need to come together to be able to harmonize the MCS strategies to combat the illegal fishing that can save the stock. And we need to improve data collection, especially of freshwater pelagic fish. Almost all these countries do not have adequate collection of freshwater fish. That's why this presentation has been focused on the marine fishery. Thank you. Let's see the next slide, if any. Yes, so you have the sources of information out there. And on my slide, I've taken the liberty to present the information of the past 2 decades. And you see the same trend for the past 2 decades, because I had a question as to whether the overexploitation is really occurring. And this trend has been going on all over the years for almost 3 to 4 decades now. Thank you very much. And I pause to receive comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, for your presentation. I think, again, we will take the questions after the last presentations, which I will be doing in a little while. And so let me just share the next one. Just close this one down and this one up. And here. Then I have to start sharing again. And this one here, share. And I hope you can see my screen now. There's no protest. Right, so this is the last presentation here, and then we will take the discussion afterwards. So just to say welcome again, I will now be talking on inland fisheries. As Francis just said in his last presentation here, they haven't covered the statistics there is quite different, but I'll try to do my best to show some results we have from African inland fisheries and their relationship to food security and nutrition. Just a little of the context, the global overview, to put them into perspective, that only 0.01% of the global water surface is actually inhabited by freshwater fish. So it's a tiny, tiny, small thing compared to the marine fisheries. But 40% of all fish species are actually freshwater. They cover 25% of the global catches. If you include the aquaculture component, it's up to 40% of the global fish production that comes from inland. They are reckoned to be about 50% under-reported. I mean, we don't have enough good statistics for many, many areas. And in contrast to the marine fisheries, they actually increase every year. Globally, there is a 2.5% linear increase per year. And if you take these figures together, I mean, the area and the amount, then they are on average 100 times more productive per unit area than marine fisheries. So there is an enormous productivity, and they are underrepresented and undervalued in the global food system. Most of these fisheries are taking place in the tropics. We have this tropical belt here where we see there's some fisheries also in the north of Russia. But otherwise, the main fisheries are in Southeast Asia, Central Africa, and South America. We should not forget that freshwater environments are also some of the most threatened ecosystems in the world. There's a lot of human interference there. There's land use, there's connectivity, dams, there's climate change, water abstraction, and all these things. So about 65% of inland waters are considered to be in a threatened state. But I'm not going to touch more about this here. We're going to talk about fish as food. And they are the biggest source of harvestable animal sourced food, ASF, available. And particularly the small fish are incredibly productive. They can reproduce their own biomass up to 4 to 5 times per year. If we look at animal sourced food, again, in the sort of global perspective, and we're talking mainly about Africa here, we can see that Africa is lacking behind. It's the continent that has the least animal sourced food available. Even if fish, which is the dark red one, is a relatively large proportion, it is still a continent that is lacking severely behind in terms of animal sourced food. And Shakuntala talked about the importance of animal sourced food in her keynote address. But fish are also health. We have to broaden the food security narrative into include nutritional aspects. And there's now very robust evidence that malnutrition, or what we call hidden hunger, is affecting millions of people. And that was what Shakuntala mentioned. So just to put it in Africa perspective again, Africa suffers from malnutrition. About 40% of children are stunted. 32,000 pregnant women, every year they die due to anemia. And about 600,000 children die every year due to vitamin A deficiency. And there was a report that came out in 2019 that says that nearly half of all child deaths in Africa, they stem from hunger. So this is a serious problem in Africa. But fish are also clean energy. I think Shakuntala even mentioned that also. Small fish is actually the most energy and cost efficient human food production system available. They have the least environmental impact in terms of greenhouse gases, water uses, fertilizers, insecticides, herbicides, compared to any other human food production system. And this is a paper that came from Ray Hilborn and his colleagues in 2018, where he compared different animal source food production systems, you had aquaculture, you had livestock, and you had capture fisheries. And he put it into a spider web diagram looking at what is the energy consumption, what are the greenhouse gas emissions, what is this eutrophication, and what is the acidification. And if you look at these three main production systems, you can see that the most clean and efficient is actually the capture fisheries. And looking closer into the component that is just the capture fisheries, we can see that the small pelagic is actually the cleanest of all these capture systems in fisheries. So from this perspective here, we can see that it is actually a very clean way of producing food. Small fish are mostly sun-dried, eaten whole. That also means that we don't use any energy for processing them. Sun is freely available there. And when they eat them whole, then all the micronutrients are preserved. And Shakuntala also mentioned this. But the strange thing is that fish are actually lacking in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They are not mentioned in SDG 2 for food. They're not mentioned in SDG 3 for health. Small-scale fisheries as a labor provider, which is a really efficient labor provider, is not mentioned in SDG 8. And fish as the most clean and climate-friendly food production is not mentioned in SDG 13. And what is most conspicuous here is that inland fisheries are not mentioned in any of the SDGs, or in particular not in SDG 14. And ecosystem approaches are also not mentioned in any of the SDGs. So in terms of the SDGs, there is some work to be done in terms of putting fish back on the menu here. The question is, are small fish generally overexploited? We heard from Francis that the West African fisheries are considered overexploited, or many of the stocks there, while the Peruvian anchoveta is safely managed. But in inland African fisheries, what we normally hear is that catches are declining, and that is taken as a sign of overfishing. But we actually look at the reported catches going back from the 1950s. This is from Fao Statistics. There has been a linear, almost linear 3.5% increase per year. So if we look at the statistics, we cannot see any decrease in the catches. There's been some fluctuations. We have some good years and bad years, but these are environmental driven. And that is typically the case with small pelagic species. They are highly fluctuating due to the environment. And in inland fisheries, we see that these fluctuations are highly correlated with climate and water level changes. And even the fishermen in Africa, they always say that fish comes with the rain. Still, there is this narrative that the fish are overexploited, particularly if you read what's coming out of Lake Victoria. They always talk about overexploiting there, and they even tried to close the fishery for 2 months in 2016 because of overfishing and rampant use of illegal gears. Illegal gears is also a big issue, and I'm coming back to that a little bit later. But again, if we look at the actual catches in Lake Victoria, they have been going steadily up over time, and they are now approaching on average about 1 million tons per year. The statistics stops here. We haven't had really good statistics for the latter years, but the trends are quite clear. The main export fishery is for this big Nile perch, which was introduced, and that has been more or less stable for 30 years, even if that is the one always called overexploited. But we look at the catches, we don't see any. But the increase we have seen here is in this little indigenous fish called dagar or umena or mukene, which is increasing about 16,000 tons per year since 1985. So this is what it really is increasing. And we find them all over in the market here as small dried fish. We see it in the other African lakes also. We have the Malawi Usipa, which is a small pelagic species. That is also the one that is really counting for the increasing catches in Malawi. It's the blue part here, that's the Usipa. We also see it in Tanganyika, the Tanganyika spread, the catches there are increasing, but there we don't have data that shows the breakdown in species. We only have some most likely underreported overall catch rates that is coming up. There's also the Kapenta, which is also originally from Lake Tanganyika, which has been introduced into several reservoirs, Kariba, Korabasa in Mozambique, Kivu in Rwanda, and Itechi in Zambia, and now is the basis of the most important fisheries in those ecosystems. So small pelagics now comprise 70% of the African inland fisheries, and they are the reason that the catches are going up every year. So there's more and more focus on these small pelagics. But if we look at African fisheries in general, and we take the size distribution of African fish species by major families, we can see that the majority of fish species are small. They're about less than 10 to 14 centimeter in total length. So there's a lot of other species that are small and they go totally unrecorded in the catches, but a lot of people are fishing them in small dams, in small water bodies, in the rivers, in lagoons and things like that. So there's a lot of subsidence fishing going on that. This table is a bit difficult, I know, and you don't have to read everything, but this is just the different lakes where we have small pelagic species. And what I just want you to concentrate on is what we call the PB ratio, or the production to biomass ratio, which on average is nearly 5 per year. That means that these small fish, they reproduce their own biomass up to 5 times per year. And the present yield in kilo per hectare is about 80 kilo per hectare. But there is room for expansion here. They are so productive that there is a lot of potential. I'll show you that later also. Let me talk a little bit about the ecology on species, and also that has some importance to this question that was about juvenile that came up earlier. I mean, everybody knows about this trophic pyramid, and that we are losing about 90% of the energy every time we go one step up. But in the aquatic food web, this is actually a size structured system. So if I turn it around and put it down and put size on the axis, we have this decrease. This is a logarithmic scale from very, very small to the large fish. And that follows a regular pattern. And that's not just for inland fisheries, that's for fisheries in general. But we must not forget that even the largest fish, they start their life as zooplankton, basically. Fish have very, very high fecundities, egg production, and they have tiny, tiny small offspring, most of them, not all, but most of them. So these small fish, I mean, even the tuna or the Nile perch, a large fish like that, they start their life as zooplankton. And they have to eat and grow to become large. So I usually say that fish, they breed like plants. They have many, many small seeds, but they feed like lions. They are all carnivores, or they need protein. There is no carbohydrates in water. And on average, it takes about 5 kilos of small fish to produce 1 kilo of big fish. So the question is now, how should we harvest this ecosystem? Should we take 1 kilo of large, or should we take 5 kilos of small? And at the moment, we are just taking the large fish. We are not allowed to catch on juveniles. And that means that we are taking the large fish out of the system, and we change the whole system, the balance of the system. But there is actually still a lot of small fish, and there's even more small fish because we are removing the large predators. So getting back to the question of juveniles, and I know it's a contentious question, but we have to remember that fish are not mammals. They breed like plants, but they feed like lions, and we have no equivalent on land. So if you look at the survivor curves, and we look at the mammals, they live for a long time, and when we reach our ripe age, then we start dying. But fish are early lost species. They have millions of eggs, and the majority of these will die long, long before they reach maturity. So we can't look at this juvenile situation like with their mammals, because all these juveniles here are the majority of them. They will die long before they reach maturity. On average, less than 0.1% of the fish will ever mature. Somebody will eat them before they reach age of maturity. So this question about catching juveniles is solely a human notion that comes from our mammal background. In nature, if you're small, if you're juvenile, you mostly serve as feed for others. And we should also forget that the large fish have more eggs. If you took a Nile perch, then when it comes to maturity, it's about 1 million eggs. If you let it grow to double the size, it has 16 times more eggs. But these are the ones we harvest, and these are the ones we take out, and then we see a change. So again, I want to emphasize the difference between land and water, because sometimes we forget about that. If we look at the terrestrial food system, we have our vegetables, we have our domesticated animals, and we have our predators. We have normally about 3 trophic levels, and we lose 90% every time we go up. But if we look at the fisheries food chain, we have up to 5 levels. They don't even exist on land. We don't have lion eaters on land. We don't have eaters of the lion eaters on land, but we have these in the aquatic food chain. And that means that when we are comparing the water and the land, we are fishing about 2 trophic levels higher. That means we are losing a lot of energy. So if we go just 1 trophic level down to the small fish, we are gaining 90% more energy. And I can show that in another way here. This is from EcoPath models, which is sort of a multi-species model that has been introduced all over the world. I don't want to get too technical about it, but we have about 150 models that cover about 40% of the oceans. And if I take all these models and just lump them together to get the global ocean production in kilo per square kilometer against the trophic level, we can see here that this strong decline in energy, and we lose about 90% every time we go 1 trophic level up. And then I can superimpose our fishing pattern. This is where we fish in this trophic pyramid. And you can see here that we are fishing mainly on trophic level 4 and trophic level 5, which is the lion eaters or the eaters of the lion eaters. On land, we are harvesting down at trophic level 2 or between 2 and 3, but mainly on trophic level 2, and we're eating a lot of vegetables. So that means that every kilo of tuna that you harvest, you could take 1 kilo, you could take 1,000 kilos of small fish. So if we wanted to improve, and there is a lot of room for improvement, we should just change our fishing pattern and go further down in the trophic web. Let me show that again now for the African lakes. We have 13 EcoPath models here. And again, if we look at the production, we have this decline as we saw in the oceans. And we also have this completely opposite exploitation pattern. We don't fish at trophic level 4 and 5 in the inland fisheries. We are down here between 3 and 4. So we are already lower in the food chain in the inland fisheries compared to the marine, but we are still too high up. We are still feeding at the lions and the lion eaters. If I take these 13 models and lump them together also and look at the catch on the y-axis and the production at the x-axis, because catch is simply a fraction of the production, then we can see that these are the targeted species here, and they have a very high exploitation rate. The catch is a very high part of the production, but that the small fish, the herbivores and the small barbs here, they are underexploited. I can take you back to Lake Victoria from an EcoPath model there in 2015. Again, we have the catch on the y-axis and the production on the x-axis. And the blue line there, that is where catch equal production. We can't go that far because we cannot take more catch out than there is produced, and we shouldn't do that. But if you look at these 3 groups of fish here, that is the dagar, the mukene, this small fish. We have the juvenile lattice, the juveniles of the adult lattice, the adult Nile perch, which is number 4 here. They are now the 2nd biggest stock in the lake. And we have the small cichlids here. Just these 3 groups alone, they produce 11 million tons per year. And we could even that the dagar is only exploited about 10% of its production. We could sustainably increase the catch on them and take out 4 million tons per year without overfishing. But that would also include fishing on juvenile lattice. And that is what people are doing right now, and they're being prosecuted for doing it, which is a bit crazy. Because to catch small fish, you need fine mesh. And now, because people are using smaller and smaller mesh sizes and fine mesh, people in Uganda, they are now sending in the army to arrest people that are buying or eating immature fish. They will be prosecuted the same way as those dealing with immature fish. And the way they're doing it is that they're confiscating the nets and burning them. And they're prosecuting people. They are confiscating their boats. And there's actually a war going on Lake Victoria now because of these regulations. You can read about it, you can Google on it. There's Fire on the Water, which is, they call it militarization of fisheries management on Lake Victoria. They have all these stop illegal fishing campaigns. And what they do is that simply they're going in now with the military and they are confiscating illegal nets and they're burning them. And they forget that these stocks that they are trying to avoid people to catch, they could produce 4 million tons of fish per year without any problems. They're producing 11 million tons. If you want to let them grow up to large Nile perch, you will, for every large kilo you have caught, you will lose 5 kilos more. So in conclusions, I'm winding up here. Inland fisheries worldwide, they grow about 2.5% per year. There's no sign of tapering off. In Africa, it's 3.5% per year, still going up. There's no signs of overfishing. Increasing catches are due to increasing focus on small fish. The fishermen are by themselves going further down in the food web. The small fish are the most abundant. They reproduce themselves 4 to 5 times per year. Some of them are very, very difficult to harvest because they are so productive. It's like insects. There is a potential for at least a 4-fold increase in African inland fisheries if you go down further in the food web. The small fish are sun-dried, they're eaten whole, there's no waste, and the energy consumption is virtually zero. They're the most affordable and the most nutrient-rich. But the potential for utilizing these fish and increasing them is inhibited due to all these size regulations that we see all over the fisheries. And these size regulations, they come from single species models, mathematical models where food is free. These models forget that it actually costs fish to produce fish. So there's a need for awareness campaigns and there's need for a revision of the management regulations. We have to revise all these size regulations because they are from single species models and they don't apply in a multi-species fishery. Thank you very much for your attention. And now let me stop the share, and I think we are now ready for a session of question and answers. But maybe before that, I've invited Martin Pastoors to start off the discussion, or maybe come with some comments or some provocative insights, or I don't know what is on your mind, Martin, but welcome to you and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jeppe. Well, I don't know what is, how I can deal with your invitation to come with these provocative ideas. In fact, I came quite late to this meeting, and I wasn't really able to prepare very much, but I think I heard some very interesting talks this morning, some very thought-provoking ideas about how you could deal with the productivity of the marine and inland systems. Let me tell you a little bit about my background and why I am here. I work as a research scientist with the Pelagic Freezer Trawler Association in Europe, which is a partner in the Fish for Food project that Maarten Bavink is involved in. I am a fisheries biologist, so I'm really focusing on research activities with the pelagic fisheries, and I'm not focusing on the policy or economical parts of the work. Although I do recognize a lot of the elements that were talked about by Santiago, for example. Our association is dealing with small pelagics, catching small pelagics, and almost all of it is used for human consumption. But then the small pelagics are slightly bigger than the ones that you've been talking about. So we're targeting herring and mackerel, horse mackerel, but also to some extent the sardines and some anchovy. And in different parts of the world, so mostly in the Northeast Atlantic, but also in West Africa, Morocco, Mauritania, and in the South Pacific. And why I'm interested in the type of topics that are on the agenda here is that I'm interested in this combination of catching wild animals and increasing the efficiency of providing food in the world at the lowest possible cost. So the sort of balancing between nutrient value and energy consumption in catching is, I think, a very important element of dealing with food security and utilizing natural resources for that purpose. There are a lot of discussions going on about small scale and large scale. I saw already some comments on that this morning in the opening on the opening lecture. And I think there are very different types of trade-offs one can make with all kind of benefits and downsides of, for example, concentration of economic factors due to quota regulations. That's not really my sort of expertise, although I do see that these discussions come up all over and over again about preferences for small scale or large scale type of exploitation. As a researcher, I try to focus a lot on the efficiency elements, but that's of course also a choice that you can make, and it has to do with the livelihoods or with providing low cost opportunities for people in low income countries. So the fisheries in the Pelagic Freezer Trawler Association are all round frozen at sea and then exported, where the main markets are in Africa and Asia, I think, and Eastern Europe as well. Yeah, and then I think I just will contribute to the discussion when questions come up.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Martin. Yeah, I mean, the whole question about large-scale fisheries or industrial fisheries and small-scale fisheries is, of course, a very important part of this whole debate. And I think John Kurian already mentioned that when he commented on Shakuntala's presentation. Of course, I mean, these two fisheries are, I mean, it's a gradient between them, but I mean, the small-scale fisheries in Africa are growing because we have a huge population growth, and labor is more cheap there than investing in machinery. I mean, what we see is that there actually used to be semi-commercial fisheries in the big lakes. The Greeks came in the 60s with purse seiners and things like that. They have all been outcompeted now by the small-scale fishermen because they are more efficient, or they're more economically efficient than the large boats for many reasons. So I mean, this is an issue of the society, and of course, in the Western world, we want to make these large-scale fisheries more efficient. We also saw what Santiago presented, that by introducing these individual quotas and things like that, we see that now all the power concentrates on very, very few companies, and some of them even gets monopoly. I mean, in Denmark, where I come from, there's 4 or 5 fishing companies left that have all the quotas, and Santiago also touched about it. Maybe we'll talk about it. So this is a societal issue. It's not much to do with the ecology of the fish, I think. But I'm definitely on the small scale side because, well, I work there. I mean, The problem is, I think, in this global discussion is that 90% of the fisheries scientists, they represent 10% of the fishermen, because 90% of the fishermen are small scale, and there's very few actually fisheries scientists working on small scale fisheries. All of them are employed by large scale fisheries. But that's another discussion. We have some questions here. There's a few for you, Santiago. I don't know, have you had time to read them? One of them is from Carlos Montero. Which are the scientific evidence to consider the Peruvian anchoveta as sustainably managed?
Okay, so there's quite a bit of work that has been done assessing the status of the fishery. But just to give some indications, for example, the minimum landing size of the anchovies is 12 centimeters, but the age of first maturity is 10. So anchovies are caught a way bit after they reproduce. This echoes in what Jeppe was saying, that catching juveniles is not that bad. However, we're not doing that either. We also have the main spawning periods are between August and September and February and March, and that's where there's no fishing taking place. The fishing season operates between April and July and between November and January. And finally, we have a very conservative harvest control rule that is adaptive to changes in the environmental conditions. The Pacific coast of South America is very variable and very dynamic. So one thing that we have done as a country is set a harvest control rule that targets an exploitation rate of about 40% of the biomass once we have reduced what we call a fixed escapement, which means that let's say that we have 10 million tons of anchovy in the water, we won't fish 4 million tons of anchovy. That's like what escapes the catch, and then we apply our harvest control rule over the exceeding biomass. So this has led to very conservative catch quotas, particularly since the mid-2000s. And what we're seeing is that the biomass is declining, however, and that happens to be mostly because of change in the production regimes of marine ecosystems. So, for example, in what we're seeing is that Peru has regime shifts that favor, due to changes in the oxygen and temperature, some species more than others. And it seems that over time, or like particularly since the 2011 or so, we are entering a low productivity regime for anchoveta. So even though we are managing it well, it's still declining a bit. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and this is an industrial fishery, and you have a lot of monitoring going on. I mean, it's one of the best monitored fisheries in the world because of its value, of course, and also after the shock when it collapsed. So, I mean, I think we can safely say that this is one of the fisheries that is under good control and constant surveillance and management. So, so that is. I think you can safely say that you have it in control. But you also have another question from Jory Schultens, Santiago. He says here, I assume the Peruvian FO industry, that is the fish meal industry, argue that it's not undermining domestic food and nutrition security in any way, since the production of anchoveta is way higher than the local market can possibly absorb. Can you answer that question?
So yeah, they argue that the market for anchoveta is not big, and that particularly that there are other alternatives for food. However, there's a question about what people are eating. This trade is allowing very few companies to make a large amount of money. And the people that are depending on those resources in the coasts are now relying on food that is produced in aquaculture or that is caught elsewhere and then imported. So it is causing a change in what they could access. They would definitely eat more fish if they had access to it. But then there's another component, which is the component of the fact that they're making so much money right now that people are not working to develop markets for this resource. But this resource would definitely increase nutrition, particularly in the highlands and the coast. Uh, when before the industrialization of anchoveta, there was for fish meal, there were supply chains that reached many different areas in the highlands and the Amazon even. So this whole thing changed. But it is true. They're saying that currently they're not undermining nutrition. We could definitely increase the amount of seafood consumed if we develop those markets. But yeah, it's a sticky one. There is some truth in their claim, but there's also much to gain.
Thank you again. And Jori has one more question. But this is a more tricky question, I guess. It's about the global production volume of what we call small fish. He says that according to official data, about 80 million tons, mostly small fish, is produced for fish meal and fish oil. But it would be useful to derive what percentage of small fish globally is actually utilized for direct human consumption. I don't know if you can answer that question because it is more a global question. How big a percentage of the small fish are used directly for human consumption compared to fish meal? Would you know?
To be honest, I don't. But there is a great paper that was published in 2018 in the Journal of Fish and Fisheries by Timothy Cashin that assesses whether or not fish that are used in fish meal are food grade or not. And I think that might be a place where we can actually find something of that sort. But if I'm not mistaken, he claims that this is roughly 20% of the small pelagics that are, or 20% of the fish that is landed for fish meal production well, 20% of the species that are landed for fish meal production are also used for direct human consumption, correct? So that's 20% of that catch.
I know.
But yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Yeah,
sorry.
I know. I'm in Norway. I'm in Norway, and we are a salmon-producing country, and we use a lot of fish meal. But I know from the statistics that the total annual world production of fish meal is actually going down. They're trying to replace the protein demand of salmon, particularly with terrestrial protein, mainly from soy from Brazil. So there is a declining trend in the overall production of fish meal. But still, there is a limit there. They reckon that they can't reduce the salmon feed down to less than 20% fish meal, because then the salmon will have its own micronutrient deficiencies. It will not be a healthy fish anymore. But globally, it seems that there is a decreasing trend.
Yeah, there was a paper also recently published that states that the trophic levels for most of the farm fish have declined over time, precisely because they're eating more plant-based feeds.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's a question from Christiana to Santiago again. Could you just please comment again on the potential of anchovies to provide sufficient nutrition for the Peruvian people? I think you can just maybe quickly say that, if I understood you right, that there's a huge potential, but maybe you'll just repeat that message.
I muted myself. Okay, so what we're seeing is that if we were to transition from our current scenario to one where we use the anchovies to produce food items, even if it's just like fillets of fish, which is not how we would eat anchovies. We would be increasing the supply of nutrients tremendously for our markets. If we were to eat all of that fish, we would probably be supplying currently, let me triple check with the numbers, something around 60% of our current demand. But if we project how this is going to look in the future, we could be feeding or supplying all of our protein, or 20% of our protein demand by 2050. So this is very significant. Anchovies currently are not feeding our population, but this could be a game changer.
Do you see any effect of your campaigns? I mean, is the consumption going up in Peru? Are people more interested? I mean, you have a lot of campaigns for it.
Yeah, so this was initially successful in the mid 2000s to, let's say, 2012 or so, because there were lots of campaigns. There was buying from the government, but then the authorities changed and funding for these campaigns dried up, and it seems that in order to secure a market, this sort of initiatives should have remained for a bit longer. And also at the beginning of this period, the canning companies that were the main suppliers of anchoveta for Peruvians had a very complex situation, because they went from producing sardines that suddenly were nowhere to be found, to then producing jack mackerel and chub mackerel cans that showed a period where they became a little bit more scarcer. And I'd say that there was excess capacity. The plants were kind of hungry, so they started trying to can anchoveta. But then these alternative stocks or alternative fish species have bounced back, mainly the mackerels, and the tuna fisheries have increased. So that means that they have less of an incentive to can anchoveta because the markets for the other species are more profitable. And at the same time, the Peru signed a lot of free trade agreements in this period that has allowed for cans of fish and coming from Thailand and many other places, but mainly Southeast Asia, that are significantly cheaper than what we produce locally. That is making a shift towards our internal demand. So I think that there are many factors at play here, but the amount of alternatives and the lack of a local demand is actually not allowing the local consumption of anchoveta to increase. We're still at roughly the same levels that we were seeing in 2006.
Yeah, we have the same situation in Norway, actually. I mean, our grandparents, they grew up on herring and potatoes. Now you can't find a herring in any of the shops anymore. People are not eating these. They just want salmon loins. And the industry has been incredibly successful in promoting this as the most healthy food you can get. So, but anyway, that's another story. There are some questions for me here. I speak only of large lakes, but there's also blooms of small pelagic fishes in the floodplain systems in Africa. And of course there is, I mean, small fish are everywhere. I mean, I used to say in Africa, where there is water, there is small fish. And of course that is also a big part of it. Unfortunately, we don't know so much about these small fish that are in other systems. But there's a lot of people fishing on them. But again, they are under these mess-size regulations that we find all over Africa, and which is actually impeding fish. We are seeing some changes, though. There are some light at the end of the tunnel. I know that in Namibia, they have now working on a new white paper for changing legislation where people are allowed now to use whatever mesh size they want. I mean, they're going to, I mean, if the rumors are right, and I have some good connections there, in Namibia, they're going to change, for the inland fisheries, they're going to abolish the mesh size regulations, that people can fish whatever mesh size they want. And I think that is a big progress. And that is also lead me to one of the other questions that comes here. How do we catch only the smaller fish and avoid the juveniles of high trophic levels, since small mesh sizes would be required? And I tried to illustrate it in my presentation, but actually catching juveniles is not a problem, even for the higher trophic fish also. Unless you want to manage for the higher trophic level fish alone. If you want to have an export fishery for Nile perch, well, it makes some sense to let them grow up. But in terms of nutrients for the people or for the populations, then every kilo of large Nile perch has cost 5 kilo of small Nile perch or smaller fish. They are also they're cannibals. So juveniles, the fish are, as I said, they have millions of fry. Most of them. And in the plant world, we have no problems even juveniles. We eat bananas, we eat apples, we eat grapes, we eat corn. I mean, they're all juvenile plants. And fish has the same life history strategy as plants. You have millions of seed and they will never grow up in the first place. Oh, very, very few of them will grow up. So why we have this idea of not catching juveniles, again, I have to reiterate, it comes from a single species model where food is free. You don't count for food, they grow mathematically. And if you get them into multi-species models and into ecosystem systems, then catching juveniles is not so much an issue anymore. It's unfortunately something we inherited from mathematical models in single species situation. And we should really reconsider them. Then there's some other questions on there. The entire fisheries management regimes are mostly towards protecting juvenile. Should there be a big change in the outlook? And again, I can only reiterate, yes, there should be. We should start getting the knowledge that we get from multi-species model. Remember that all over the world, we are still using single species management models. Very few, if any, country in the world are using multi-species models. And as long as we are in the single species world, then we have this idea about juvenile fishing. But what we know from multi-species models is that there you have to account for the food, and then the whole thing changes. So I hope that there is or there's need for a redirection of this idea. We have to get out of this single species management considerations. Then there's another one. I don't have the latest data, but in Kenya, according to me, catches are not increasing by 3%, 3.5%. What could have caused that? What could we learn from that? Well, the 3.5% increase is the general increase for all Africa, and it's an average. But in Kenya, the catches are going up also, not everywhere. And again, people, that's another thing that people are, sometimes they say the catch rate, I mean, the individual catch per unit effort, they look at that as decreasing, but the catch rates or the individual catches are always going down. The more people you get into a fishery, the less there will be for each, but the total catch can still go up. So there's a lot of confusion around in the world between what we call the individual catch and the total catch, and these are often confused. And maybe that is what people think about when they say catches are going down. They're looking at the individual catch, which will always go down as more people come in, but the total catch is increasing. And the total catch is increasing in all these countries according to the figures we have. I think that is more or less all the questions I can see here. I think we have answered them. There is here a question: how do we move these questions into the policy levels. And I think this is what this whole session is about, this seminar here. So unless some people have missed something, I think we have touched on all the questions I can see here, more or less. I've lumped some of them, but then I want to then ask the panelists. I mean, we are now we still on the schedule. We still have about 20 minutes left, but if there's no more questions, we can actually wind up and have a bit longer break until the next session. But I would like to finish off by asking my two panelists here, Santiago and Francis, if they have any final comments or things they want to tell. Yeah, Santiago.
All good on my end.
You're fine. Yeah. And Francis, do you have any last comments? I don't see Francis. I only see, oh, yeah, he's there. I see him, yes. What about you, Martin? Do you have some final comments?
Well, I'm very intrigued by the presentation that you gave on the productivity in the inland waters. I always thought that there is no such thing as a free lunch, so it has to come from somewhere. But I think there is a lot of efficiency to be gained by harvesting the smaller parts of the ecosystem. I think there will be trade-offs that we need to take into account. But I think overall your remarks about the fact that a lot of the fishery management approaches is based on single species models is a very, very relevant issue. And I think if the world that I mostly work in the Northeast Atlantic, everything is sort of single species, except we have for the North Sea, there's this multi-species model, and that immediately gives you a very different perspective if you start applying the interactions between different components. So I think it's a very important element of thinking about harvesting from natural resources, that we take into account the predator-prey interactions in that system. So I think I just want to support that as a very important outcome.
Okay. No, I entirely agree. Francis, you wanted to say something?
Yes. Oh, just to I like your presentation, but I wanted to find out from which countries the information about the production came from, given that quite a lot of them are not too good. If some information sources could be shared with us. Thank you.
Right. The graph I showed you about the 3.5% growth is from FAO statistics. They are simply just these annual statistics that FAO produces. And we know that they are seriously underrepresented. I mean, they're covering only a fraction. So it's just, I mean, we're looking at the trends. We're not looking at the overall volume, Francis. But the trends indicate an increase. And for those lakes where we have data like Malawi and Lake Victoria and a little bit on Lake Tanganyika and some of these lakes, we do see an increase in the catches. And interesting also, we see an increase in the small pelagics, even if they're heavily harvested. There's just a paper that came out from Lake Kivu where they introduced this small pelagic clupid. And even if they're now catching huge volumes, then the biomass is actually increasing also. But you're right. I mean, even in Ghana, where you come from, we reckon that the statistics from Lake Volta there is very, very much underrepresented. If you ask me, Francis, then I would say that the inland fisheries in Ghana are most likely producing more fish than the marine, but they're undervalued.
Yeah, that is actually my view. And if we can advocate for FAO and other donor partners to pay attention, push the countries to pay attention to inland fisheries, we'll be able to get more productivity and have more records as to the value from inland fisheries for all of us.
But we are using some overall figures also. I mean, we know that the average production in an inland fishery in Africa will be around between 100 and 200 kilos per hectare. So we can actually make projection from that, simply from we know the surface of the water area, we have good figures on that, and we know what the average production of fish would be in a system like that. And if we look at figures like that, which are very sort of meta figures there, then we reckon that the inland fisheries of Africa could easily produce 4 to 5 times more than is actually reported right now. Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But if that is the situation, then I will say thank you very much for the panelists, and I will give the word back to Martin Bavink.
Okay, Jeppe, thank you very much for this very interesting panel. With a wonderful set of speakers and panelists. Thank you very much for that. I'm always tickled a bit when Jeppe starts talking about lion eaters and eaters of lion eaters in a fishery seminar. But I think the presentation was very, very clear. And also introduces this whole balanced harvest model, which is one of the things which is very much up for discussion in the fisheries scene. There's a few things I'd like to say. The first is that these presentations have brought up different kinds of issues which are kind of on the side, but at the same time very important. One is the environmental side, that you cannot talk about capture fish without also talking about the environment in which these capture fish reside. And environmental influences are having an impact on both the inland as well as the oceanic and the marine environments. So that's one thing which we might want to keep in mind in the follow-up. The second is that we have also encountered social justice issues, or issues which you could call societal. And I think the most noteworthy which has come up is the divide between industrial and small-scale fisheries. In many places in my own fieldwork experience, I've seen a lot of what you could call industrializing the fisheries, not necessarily with big vessels such as operated by the Pelagic Freezer Association, but small units, but moving towards what you could call an industrialization at larger scales using ring seine nets, etc., which are also threatening small-scale fishers in coastal regions. So anyway, that's a second set of issues, social justice issues. And thirdly, maybe a set of distributional issues. And one of these has come forward when we talk about fish meal, the small fish being used either for human consumption or for animal feed. That's one big discussion we hope to return to in the coming 2 days. And another one which intrigued me also, which was brought up by Martin Pastoors, when he was talking about the herring and so on, caught in the Northeast Atlantic and then transported to Africa for food security. And that's a different kind of distributional issue, parallel in a sense to the Peruvian anchoveta, which is transformed into fish meal and going to all kinds of countries in which the aquaculture industry is important. Anyway, I think we have touched on a number of important issues. One last thing, you may have noticed from looking at the program that in trying to deal with all sections of the fish chain, we are actually also moving across disciplines. In this first session, we have been hearing largely from biologists and maybe economists. And as we move towards other sections, we will be hearing other disciplines, other representatives of other disciplines also coming forward, without hopefully losing the insights which are provided by the group that has been speaking now. Okay, so that I think we've made a very good start in this seminar. We now have a break of 40 minutes. We'll be reconvening at 2 p.m. Central European time. Thanks all of you for bearing with us and staying. And we hope to see you again in 40 minutes time. So have a good break and we'll see you in a little bit.